Well, first of all, even with a very poor and limited imagination, it's easy to picture what kind of hell is happening in Putin's head today. His pride, his May 9th parade, can easily be turned into a disaster and a massacre. Zelensky is cunning Zelensky. He carefully hinted that such a thing is quite possible in principle. And this is not empty boasting. The Russian Führer has already been informed that the Ukrainian armed forces have something that can reach Red Square on May 9th. And it's not just Putin. Everyone is aware that, yes, Ukraine already has a device that can turn the grand show on May 9th into a small, I would say, Vesuvius with a mix of Colorado ribbons, splashes, Botox, as well as shreds of African, Brazilian, and Slovak friends of the Kremlin. Of course, it's frightening that into the sandbox with children, somewhere in a yard on Tverskaya, a head, Fico, or fragments of Lukashenko might fly in. This is a job for a speech therapist for years to come. And Fico still won't speak, and Lukashenko will never again show where the attack was being prepared from. Of course, maybe for someone from the leaders gathered at the mausoleum, they might be luckier, and it will fly right into gum during a sale. Well, Pashinyan is known for his luck. And as for Bodrogumba, have you heard of him? He is the new president of Abkhazia, the head of none other than Abkhazia. In flight, he might scatter into several thousand mandarins. So various outcomes are possible. But this movement, the prospect of this movement somehow doesn't please Putin. The fact is that the Russian air defense has repeatedly proven its incompetence. Even at the beginning of the war, when the flight capabilities, not just of missiles, but of drones in the SU, were much more modest. Nevertheless, they managed to hit the Kremlin, if you remember. And even if the air defense works, and from somewhere flaming ones will fall, 100-kilogram debris falls from somewhere, then still probably the guests who survive will be left with a lingering feeling. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Belousov, of course, volunteered to reliably cover the Kremlin sky, but only by placing the icon of Comrade Rublev's Trinity in the center of the square. And Gundyaev promised to spend the night in prayers and still managed to beg his superiors for a squadron of interceptor angels. He promised, but in truth, he laughed at himself when he heard it. That is, the probability percentage of such a fire show on May 9th is, frankly speaking, small. One could say that it is even negligible. But the smallest probability is still not zero. Nevertheless, it exists. For there is war. And there are corresponding weapons. And there is Zelensky's hint. An event of such scale and level like the parade, with tankettes and heads of state, requires 1,000% guarantee of safety. But after Zelensky's rather vague remark, which can be interpreted, by the way, in any way, the possibility of collective ascension and scattering of guests is no longer equal to zero. Answer: what kind of situation arises? Of course, according to all security protocols, international ones, the review must be cancelled. And it shouldn't have been scheduled in the first place, just as it shouldn't have even been mentioned. Nevertheless, well, Putin can't. He was consumed by the itch for international recognition. And this itch set him up. He invited all these nabobs from Vietnam and Laos, prepared the mausoleum and the square for them, and now it turns out that everything is, in general, hanging by a thread. Moreover, it's still unknown what's better for Putin if he arrives. So, if he doesn't arrive. If he doesn't arrive, that's also a disaster. Because if he doesn't arrive at all, then it will be a direct act of nobility by Zelensky and Ukraine's aspiration for peace. And the Kremlin's patient is also tormented by this thought. He would probably, I don't even know, but most likely he would prefer the arrival over the horror of being pitied. And the horror, when the entire world press buzzes that Zelensky pitied Putin.